Well, I'm assuming that I'm live. Is that right? Hope so. My name is Dan Ouelette. I've been a writer, boy, for some 40 years uh, on jazz and beyond, too. I've done a lot of pop and rock music over the years. Smart stuff, not kind of fluffy stuff. At any rate, I am on the program today to talk about my new book, which is called The Landfill Chronicles. Now, the name is a little bit tricky. The Landfill Chronicles. Well, what does that mean? What's a landfill? Uh, I'll tell you in a minute. But before I get there, uh, I just wanted to. Gail asked me to just kind of like go through a little bit of information, background information on me and my jazz world. Um, the first album I ever bought that was a jazz album was John McLaughlin's Mahavishnu Orchestra, Birds of Fire. Um, and those were back in the days on FM, uh, you know, FM, non commercial FM stations that were playing everything. And I was really jazzed about Open Country Joy. And I even went to see him and the Mahavishnu Orchestra. That's when I was going to school at University of Massachusetts Amherst. I actually went to Lowell uh, when they were on their tour and saw them perform. So that was kind of like it was pretty great. But I kind of still went back into following singer songwriters and prog rock. Like I love the band Yes, their Fragile and Close to the Edge albums. There's a big buzz on Yes right now, I think. Um, and I just continued kind of trying to take in as much as I could. It wasn't until I moved to California where I was in Massachusetts. I moved to California and I started, kind of hearing sounds. I was writing for Downbeat at the time, and back when their banner was jazz, blues, and beyond. And since I had been doing some writing on in the beyond area, they took me on board and gave me beyond assignments. So like I interviewed Carlos Santana. I interviewed uh, who else did I interview? John Mayhall. Um, and one year, I think it was 1991, they invited me to come to Chicago from where I was living in Berkeley to come to review the Chicago Jazz Festival um, as a beyond writer, to get my perspective as a beyond writer. Well, that was a very seminal trip for me because Miles Davis was playing there with his band. Horace Silver was playing there with his band. Hal Russell. I just, it opened up my ears way, way, way beyond what I had always knew. So I went back to San Francisco and I covered the jazz beat in San Francisco, which was just kind of like taking off with Peter Applebaum, Charlie Hunter, and some others. And I was just kind of in the groove, in the pits with that. But at the same time, since I was writing for the Chronicle, I was also covering um, beyond music, singer songwriters, Suzanne Vega, um, any number of things. So I was not exclusively jazz. I kind of went both fields, and I felt really good about it. When I moved to um, New York in 1999, I had already had a little bit of a reputation with the jazz community through emails and writing bios for their labels and stuff. And from then on in, I was almost exclusively a jazz writer. I was no longer a beyond writer, although I tried my best to try to do anything beyond as I possibly could because I like that music. So what ended up happening was I wrote for several different magazines, newspapers, etc. What happened to me then was I taped all those things. I taped all the interviews I did. I wrote them all up. Sometimes I wrote like what was required to be a 3,000 word thing. I would write 7,000, 7,000 words. Fast forward, the digital era came into play, and I wrote some digital stuff, but my services as a print writer were getting fewer and fewer. And they all came to an abrupt halt with the pandemic. All of a sudden, there were no shows to go to so that I could, interact with performers. And there was no jobs because a lot of magazines, some magazines died. Uh, and so I had no access to follow my joy, which is writing. So what I did was I kind of realized, I've got all these archival stories that are in magazines, and I tried to track them down online to see if they were still alive, still in existence. And much to my surprise, a very, very, like none of them were online. They were gone. The magazines were, and here's where it comes to the word landfill, they were carted up and seen as trash because you just got to get them out of the house. And so they went to the landfill. And that's where I started thinking, how can I retrieve some of these stories that I wrote in magazines and newspapers? How can I retrieve them and give them a new life? And that's the Landfill Chronicles. So I'll share with you a little bit from the preface of my book um, about the mountains of garbage created by modern society and containing the byproducts of history, waiting to be probed like ancient tells by future excavators, seeking for insight into a crazed mass consumption culture. Filling the bulk of these bulldozer compacted sites are common day throwaway items like non-recyclable plastics, glass shards, pulverized concrete, and twisted rebar, animal fat and bones, decaying wet vegetable matter fit for the compost pile, and arguably the most notorious toss, paper, which when decomposed by bacteria in the soil accounts for the potent greenhouse gas methane, which is 20% more detrimental to the atmosphere than carbon dioxide. So I started thinking, geez, all those stories that I told and wrote about were in the landfill. My first idea was I need to kind of retrieve them and somehow get them archived. I felt it was really important. I have tapes that I have not uh, transferred to digital, and those are pretty valuable too. So I started going through some of my files and looking and picking and choosing files that I was interested in reviving, reliving. And the first one really was Frank Zappa. I wrote, um, I did his last long interview before he died. And it was published I went to his house in Hollywood uh, and had a really pleasant experience with him. Spent 5 hours with him. The assignment was for Tower Pulse. Tower Records had a monthly Pulse magazine, which had a lot of editorial and trying to drive traffic to buy records. Uh, I wrote it, and it was probably 7,000, 8,000 words. And of course, because we're dealing with print, they shaved it down to maybe 3,000, 3,500. So there was a lot left over. So I thought, well, I can use that, my writer's copy. I have the file. I can just go and use that. But what I soon discovered was that you cannot access that magazine, Frank Zappa in Tower Pulse. It doesn't exist. Now, this was in 1993, so it was pre-digital craze. And so it was never saved in a digital format. It was all print. And print, as I said, is in the landfill. I still have like 2 or 3 copies of it, which I really value. So what I did was I went through, I started piecing together stuff from my Pulse article, but also kind of an obit that I did for both Downbeat and for Soma magazine in San Francisco after he died. And so I kind of stitched those all together. And it was a very important story for me. You know, as you know, Tower Records died an unfortunate death, the way it used to be so great. And it, was gone. So I want to read you a quick little thing from my Frank Zappa chapter, and then I'll tell you what else is in here. Where are you, Frank? Okay. After waiting, this is when I was at the house. After waiting for a few minutes, Frank slowly enters, casually dressed in blue sweats, turquoise t-shirt, and a loosely fitting gray sweater. He smiles, lights up the first of several Marlboros, and shakes my hand. Today, he said, he's feeling okay. He immediately puts me at ease with a calmness and generosity that I was not prepared for. From an artist notoriously reputed to eat journalists for lunch. For the next 4 hours, in the video room and in his Utility Muffin Research Center studio, where he and his assistants played the daily feast on popcorn, he's animated at times, fervently enjoying himself as we effortlessly interweave musical matters with politics. However, as a consequence of his illness, there are moments when Frank, his dark hair streaked with gray and tied in a tight ponytail, visibly tires as if his batteries have temporarily faded. But when we take off on another subject area, he rejuvenates. One of the cool things, so this whole chapter is about what we talked about, a lot about his latter work when he was performing pieces, writing pieces and performing pieces for the classical world. But one of the, it was kind of serious conversation. But at one point, I say, our conversation pauses for a moment. Frank's daughter, Diva, in her early teens, bounces down the stairs, pokes her head into the viewing room where we're talking, and announces herself with a bright, "Hi, Daddy." She's the youngest of Frank and his wife Gail's 4 children. Eldest daughter, Moon Unit, collaborated with Dad on the 1982 novelty tune Valley Girl from Frank's Shipping Too Late to Save a Drowning Witch album. His sons, Dweezil and Ahmed, are into the rock biz, with the former leading his own band, which the latter sings on occasion. So Frank says, "How's little Squeech?" "Squeech is fine, but I don't think that's the name of it," says Diva. "But you can nickname it whatever you want." Diva bounds back up the stairs while Frank explains this exchange. "We have a new kitten," he said. "It's the run of the litter. It's adorable. I've been calling it Squeech because that's the name, that's the noise it makes. Diva wanted to call it Toaster, but I guess she's changed her mind. It's such a human part of Frank and his family, who he's got a history of not being so nice. At any rate, I started putting these stories together, and I'm thinking, okay, where can I get them out into the mix? And I had been a member of a writers platform called Medium, and for a small fee. So I went to Medium and I started posting these different parts of the chapter in posts and put them out there, and that got a little bit of attention from people. I think the next one I did was Wayne Shorter, which was also a real thrill to be doing Wayne Shorter, and on and on and on. So I got to a point where I was 20, I was in my upper 20s chapters. And I had no idea where this was going to go. And all of a sudden, I get a message from an editor, a publisher, Gary's name. At any rate, Gary from Symbol Press. And he messaged me and he said, so I've been enjoying your chapters. Are you going to be doing anything with them? Are you going to be publishing them? And I thought, geez, I hadn't really gotten to that point where I was ready to kind of like unload these and bring them back into print form. But I said, yeah. And so we had started having a conversation, and it made it that I had another 7 chapters to write, and I was finished. And that ended up becoming the Landfill Chronicles. And, if you love music, you love reading about the creative process in seminal conversations over the decades. While the book leans in the jazz direction, there are also some long buried stories you can't find with some of the pop's greats: Lou Reed, Frank Zappa, Joni Mitchell, David Byrne, plus blues, John Lee Hooker, and world, Astor Piazzolla. But as far as jazz goes, one reader who wasn't familiar with jazz at all, he braved ahead and he read about them and realized he was marveled at the wonders of the creative artistry that's in the book, The Landfill Chronicles. So, yeah. From the Landfill Chronicles, I've been putting out word about the book, and I'll read this from the Landfill Chronicles, chapter on Wayne Shorter, the ultimate jazz astronaut. At one point in our decade-long conversations, ranging from his quartet to his certainty of a spaceship invasion that took place, Wayne said, "I suppose I'm looking for a dream like Martin Luther King Jr. I want the music to do that, but the music itself won't be dreamy or ethereal. There's going to be a lot of dissonances going on that will seem contrary to dreaming." And I thought that was a great quote. I put it up there to try to say, want to learn more about Wayne Shorter, get the book. There's a lot of stuff in there about how marvelous and how wonderful he was. I then recently I kind of pulled out a segment from my chapter on Carla Bley, who I went up to her house in, up the Hudson near Woodstock, and sat down with her for a couple hours and had a really great conversation with her. Very meaningful, great memory of that. So here's an excerpt from the chapter, Carla Bley, Jumping Jazz Loops. At one point in our conversation in her home, she responded to ECM Records owner Manfred Eichers, describing her as being in, quote, the tradition of radical originality, unquote. She disagreed. She frowned. She disagreed, telling me, I'm just trying to be normal, to sound totally classical, but I fail miserably. That's from like one of jazz's great artists who's unfortunately no longer with us. So the full conversation of Carla's unpredictable music of playful mystery, soulful contemplation, humor, and grace are in that chapter on her. Another one that I was pretty fond of was John Abercrombie, who he's one of the great jazz guitarists, just an amazing performer, and recorded some amazing albums for, by the way, ECM. So my chapter, John Abercrombie, Six String Adventures, I write, in his upstate New York home, the master jazz guitarist John Abercrombie is a terrific storyteller. Early in our conversation, he tells me of his first year experience in 1962 at Berklee School of Music. It wasn't college, called college then, Berklee School of Music. He heard fellow classmate Sadao Watanabe practicing Charlie Parker tunes. He was crushed. I felt terrible, he says. I thought, I'll never be able to play this music. It's too hard. But I stuck it out. I didn't know what else to do. If that didn't work well, I thought I could go home and pump gas. I could give it up and become one of everyone else. That kind of that's the kind of a summary of what all these artists are in the Landfill Chronicles. They're people who worked on their artistry, even though it seemed at times that they were going nowhere and were faced with all kinds of challenges. But the bottom line is they knew that they were artists. And the whole idea of like, yeah, well, I could go home and pump gas. I could give it up and become one of everyone else. That's pretty profound statement. Well, what he went on to do is become one of jazz's great master pianists. So what else do I have to share with you? So there's a chapter on, what is it? Oh, Dee Dee Bridgewater. I went with her and a team to Mali back in, I can't remember, when she was trying to discover where her roots were in Africa. And it came the evidence was showing Mali. So she decided to go there and record an album in Mali with Malian players. And I was fortunate enough to be a part of that trip. And, it was a thrill. And this is like, just doing things there. Here's an excerpt. One of the first Bamako is the capital of Mali. One of their first Bamako stops was a restaurant to see Ngoli player Basu Koulibaly. I was so touched by what I was hearing that I went on stage and sang, Dee Dee says. The music made my spirit soar. I can't explain what happened. It was an unspoken thing. We spoke the same language musically. I was making up lyrics as we jammed. It was like I was in a trance. The whole story is in here of her whole story. And another story that was on the road was Regina Carter. She took a big early in her career. She took a bold decision and set it up to play Paganini's canon violin, famous, and record it in Genoa, where the violin is entombed. To get the violin to the stage, to number one, practice, and then to record was an ordeal. That was brought to Regina with, I think it was 2 or 3 armed guards with weapons, because they were in Genoa, it was such a treasure that they wanted no one to make a mistake and damage it, or even, for that matter, steal it. So Regina was successful. She performed it, and even later went to New York. They brought the violin to New York, and she performed it. When I shared with her that chapter, she said, "These stories are captivating." She's talking about the whole book. Reliving my incredible Genoa experience through Dan's perspective made the story even more fascinating. And then she added, "I love Dee Dee's chapter too. Dan makes me feel like I was there, a fly on the wall." So I felt really good about that, because that's what I was setting out to do. There's a lot in here. You can track down the book, and I'll show it to you again. Here it is. On Amazon, just my name and the Landfill Chronicles, and that's just kind of huge for me. One final thing I want to say, because I'm running out of time, is just talking about the whole notion of interviewing. I interviewed lots of people and got down to the roots. And here's my advice for people who are possibly thinking about writing about jazz. I said, first off, do your homework beforehand. Know the person, know their music. Try not to query too much about their past life when they started playing music. That's pretty much available online for your prep. But talk about the process they went through. Lastly, do not resort to a straight question and answer format when talking. Straight Q&As are oftentimes make for boring reading. So, thanks for listening. I have a couple people who are replying. I don't have any question I don't have any time for questions, but please, The Landfill Chronicles by Dan Ouelette, and my last name is Ouellettte, is available online on Amazon. So please give it a shout, give it a try, send me information. Okay, I'm done. 30 minutes. Boy, that went fast. Thank you so much for tuning in. And yeah. Okay, thank you. And Gail, thank you so much. Huge. Okay, that's where you can get in touch with me, right there. Okay, adios. How do I get out of this now? Okay, leave studio. I'm leaving the studio.